Welcome to our educational channel, Udayan the Education Hub, and today's topic of discussion is the Cold War. So let's start. The Cold War. This word is something different from the regular words we used about the movements or wars or fights or any political or economical problems. But the word Cold War is something new, something different, and the two words like cold and war is not similar to each other. So at first, we have to know or learn the meaning of the Cold War. Cold War, which is a conflict over ideological differences carried on by methods short of sustained over military action and usually without breaking of diplomatic relations. The Cold War was a larger conflict between the United States and the Soviet Union. It was called Cold War because the US and the Soviet Union did not fight each directly, but instead engaged in a war of threats, right? The Cold War was a period of economic, political, and military tension between the United States and the Soviet Union from 1945 to 1999. Okay, so here Cold War referred to competitions, tensions, and the series of confrontations between the US and USSR. Okay, so here the natural or normal wars which are called warm war. Okay, so what is Cold War different from the hot war? Cold War is normally a political war wherein violence is not employed. That is the main fact, friends. Here, violence is not employed. On the other hand, hot war is exactly the opposite of the Cold War. In other words, it can be said that hot war is a serious war between two countries wherein guns and other deadly weapons are used. And in the Cold War, they does not use. Okay? There is a big difference between these both type of wars. Today, the Cold War is largely a company war. Okay, type of company war. Now, who first called Cold War? On this day, in 1947, Bernard Baruch, the multimillionaire financier and advisor to presidents from Woodrow Wilson to Harry S. Truman, coined the term Cold War to describe the increasingly chilly relation between two World War II allies, the United States and the Soviet Union. Then it's clear to all that this Cold War is basically had started between the two powerful countries, okay, United States of America and Soviet Union. And Bernard Baruch coined the term Cold War in 1947. You all have to remember that. Now, another question is in our mind now, that who started Cold War? As World War II transformed both the United States and the USSR, turning the nations into formidable world powers, competition between the two increased. Following the defeat of the Axis powers, an ideological and political rivalry between United States and USSR gave way to the start of the Cold War actually. The United States was not the only leading power on the world stage after the end of World War II. it had a new competitor for this power in the Soviet Union. Tensions between the former allies quickly grew, leading to a new kind of conflict, one heightened with the threat of atomic weapons that came to dominate global politics for the remainder of the 20th century. Okay? Tensions between the United States and its unlikely ally in the Soviet Union persisted throughout World War II. Western Allied leaders did not forget that initial non-aggression pact made between Soviet Premier Joseph Stalin and Adolf Hitler in 1939. However, Germany's invasion of the Soviet Union and Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor created an alliance between the United States and the USSR. As World War II transformed both the United States and the USSR, turning the nations into formidable world powers, right? And the competition between the two increased. And following the defeat of these two Axis powers, an ideological and political rivalry between the United States and the USSR gave birth the situation of Cold War. The subsequent race for superior military power sparked an era of espionage, wars over the spread of communism, and the build-up of nuclear arms that threatened global annihilation. Origins of the Cold War. Following the surrender of Nazi Germany in May 1945, near the close of World War II, the uneasy wartime alliance between the United States and the Great Britain on the one hand and the Soviet Union on the other hand began to unravel. By 1948, the Soviets had installed left-wing governments in the countries of Eastern Europe that had been liberated by the Red Army. The Americans and the British feared the permanent Soviet domination of Eastern Europe and the threat of Soviet-influenced communist parties coming to the power in democracies of Western Europe. The Soviets, on the other hand, was determined to maintain control of Eastern Europe in order to safeguard against any possible renewed threat from Germany, and they were intent on spreading communism worldwide, largely for ideological reasons. The Cold War had solidified by 1947-48 when US aid provided under the Marshall Plan to Western Europe had brought those countries under American influence, and the Soviets had installed openly communist regimes in Eastern Europe. And here we can find the struggle between the superpowers actually. The Cold War reached its peak in 1948 to 53. This period, the Soviets unsuccessfully blocked the western-held sectors of West Berlin. The United States and its European allies formed the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which means NATO, a unified military command to resist the Soviet presence in Europe in the year 1949. The Soviets exploded their first atomic warhead 1949, thus ending the American monopoly on the atomic bomb. The Chinese communists came to power in mainland China in the year 1949, and the Soviet-supported communist government of North Korea invaded US-supported South Korea in the year 1950, setting off an indecisive Korean War that lasted until 1953. The Cuban Missile Crisis showed that neither the United States nor the Soviet Union were ready to use nuclear weapons for fear of the other's relations. The two superpowers soon signed the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty of 1963, which banned above-ground nuclear weapons testing. But the crisis also hardened the Soviets' determination never again to be humiliated by their military inferiority, and they began to build up of both conventional and strategic forces that the United States were forced to match for the next 25 years. Throughout the Cold War, the United States and the Soviet Union avoided direct military confrontation, right? Because it's a Cold War. It was a Cold War in Europe actually, and engaged in actual combat operations only to keep allies from defecting to the other side or to overthrow them after they had done so. Thus, the Soviet Union sent troops to preserve communist rule in East Germany, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Afghanistan. Okay, for this part, this all happens from 1953 to 1979. Okay, for its part, the United States helped overthrow a left-wing government in Guatemala in 1954, supported an unsuccessful invasion of Cuba in the year 1961, invaded the Dominican Republic in 1965 and Grenada 1983, and undertook a long from 1964 to 75 an unsuccessful effort to prevent communist North Vietnam from bringing South Vietnam under its rule. Okay, which we can found in the information in Vietnam War. Okay, now the causes of Cold War or the reasons behind the Cold War. As already mentioned briefly, many reasons account for the origin of the Cold War. The important reasons are, firstly, the ideological distinction between the USSR and USA, with the former being a capitalist country and the latter a communist one. There is a very less possibility that the two ideologies can exist peacefully with each other. Each will try to dominate the global politics, which will definitely pave the way for conflict. Secondly, the armament competition between USSR and USA could also be a reason behind the Cold War. Each side tried to increase their military capacity after the Second World War, which posed a direct threat to the other side. As a result of which the other side also tried to increase its military capacity. The whole world virtually got divided into two competing power blocks actually, to produce different armaments such as atom bomb, nuclear weapon, hydrogen bomb, and other lethal weapons. Thirdly, the spread of communist ideologies in different European countries and the setting up of communist governments threatened the capitalist expansion. Each side began to contain each other's influence, which resulted into the Cold War. And the reason number 4, although the Soviet Union and the United States together fought against the Axis power comprising Germany, Italy, and Japan in the Second World War, but they lacked real cooperation, as both used to suspect each other, which soon transformed into a full-scale mutual distrust immediately after the Second World War, which ultimately led to the beginning Cold War. And during the World War, allied countries like US, UK, and France and Soviet Union fought together against the Axis powers, Nazi Germany, Japan, Austria. However, this wartime alliance could not work out after World War II due to multiple factors. Then one factor is Potsdam Conference. The Potsdam Conference was held at Berlin in 1945 among US, UK, and Soviet Union to discuss immediate administration of defeated Germany. Number 2, demarcation of boundary of Poland. Number 3, occupation of Austria. And number 4, role of the Soviet Union in Eastern Europe. Soviet Union wanted some portion of Poland to be maintained as a buffer zone. However, the USA and UK did not agree to this demand. Also, the USA did not inform the Soviet Union about the exact nature of atomic bomb dropped on Japan. This created suspicion in Soviet Union about the intentions of Western countries embittering of the alliance. And this created suspicion in the Soviet leadership. And another factor is Truman's Doctrine. Truman Doctrine was announced on March 12, 1947 by US President Harry S. Truman. The Truman Doctrine was a US policy to stop the Soviet Union's communist and imperialist endeavors through various ways like providing economic aid to other countries. For example, US appropriated financial aid to support the economics and militaries of Greece and Turkey. Historians believe that the announcement of this doctrine marked the official declaration of the Cold War.